Good afternoon and welcome to Seniors Count. I'm your host, Greg Jocelyn. On our show, we believe that you are the foundation on which Boston was built. So our goal is to connect you to resources, benefits, and information to enhance your life. Thanks for joining us today. Right now, we're really excited because we're learning about the little-known archaeological digs happening in your own backyard in the city of Boston with the city of Boston's resident archaeologist, Joseph Bagley. So welcome to the show, Joseph.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure to have you.
Thanks.
So I wanted to ask you first, do you remember the first moment that you decided you wanted to be an archaeologist?
Yeah, I grew up in Maine, in a rural area of Maine, and I remember digging in my backyard and thinking about all the stuff that could be there. And I was interested in dinosaurs, of course, but also the native stuff that could have been there. And I remember thinking this would be fun to do. And then in high school, looking into science, but not wanting to be in a lab per se all the time, but history, but I wanted to be outdoors. And archaeology just made sense. Did a dig for a week up in Maine, and then it really clicked that this was what I needed to do.
Wow. So, yeah. And it's not dinosaurs.
It's not dinosaurs. I need to clarify that, yeah. So paleontology.
So can you describe what it is?
Sure. The biggest difference is archaeologists study people and paleontologists study animals. And so the difference, the cutoff is people. And so archaeologists study the stuff that people left behind, and paleontologists study animal bones. And so that's really the biggest difference. Ancient animal bones versus modern humans.
Right. And do you remember when you were doing that dig in Maine? I mean, was there one thing that, or like a memory that you have that always stuck with you? Or?
Yeah, when we got onto the site, and it's the coast of Maine, and so you see kind of the landscape along the waterfront, and it's a very traditional place in Maine where you get just the waters, the rocks, and the land, but then to know that underneath the ground in that spot was thousands of years worth of history represented and stuff that had piled up there. And then once we broke open the ground and you started to actually see the artifacts coming out of the ground, I think that was the part that really excited me, was that it was so much more than just a place. It was a story suddenly, and it wasn't just the rocks and the water and the land. It was that, and it went backwards 10,000 years, and that was the part that just kind of was very eye-opening to me, that there's so much more to the ground that we're walking on than just now. So that was really exciting.
That's wonderful. And so that led you to study professionally.
Yeah, I had already gotten into the BU program in archaeology, and this was kind of the test to see if it was something I actually wanted to do, which was nice to know going into the program that this is definitely where I wanted to go career-wise, and it's worked out so far.
And so what's interesting, so you're going from a rural dig to now you work for the city of Boston, and you're doing urban digs. So tell me a little bit about why these urban digs matter for us as residents.
So the city of Boston, as we know, is at least almost 400 years old as a city. And so the story of what you see on the landscape is, it has such a deep history to it already, just from the buildings and the landmarks that you see when you're walking around the city of Boston. But there, in between those and around those and underneath those, there's so much more stories there that are left to be kind of found. And whether it be a vacant lot across the street, or an area of the shoreline that is eroding, there could be more to that story. And for me, coming into the City of Boston archaeology program with more of a Native American background, because that's what I studied originally, for me, it was an exciting opportunity to kind of bring that out of the story, because I'm the fourth city archaeologist since 1983, and I'm the first one to come to the program with a strong background in Native American archaeology. And so I do Native and historical, but I really wanted to kind of treat those on equal playing fields, because to me, it's not just what happened after 1630, it's also what happened for the past 10,000 years that people have actually been in Boston. And we have almost as many Native American sites as historical sites in Boston right now, and nobody knows that. And so I want to make sure that, you know, that amount of history that's still here and has been found already, plus the stuff we haven't found yet, is known and appreciated at the same level as the stuff from 1630, 1730, 1830, because it's all part of the story.
Right. And so can you give me an example of or just one moment that kind of surprised you about a dig, or you found something that kind of went beyond the narrative that we normally think about?
Yeah. I haven't done a ton of digging in Boston. I've only been in the position for 2.5 years, but one of the ones that I thought was really exciting was we'd done a dig in the training field in Charlestown's training field, which is just south of the Breeds Hill Monument, the Battle Bunker Hill Monument. It was a very small parcel of land, about an acre. There's pathways, a little bit of green grass, and a statue, and that's a historical site because it was the training field for the Revolutionary War. Going into it, we knew that there was an opportunity to find Native American artifacts there just because it hadn't been completely developed and therefore disturbed. So if something was there, it could still be there. And we ended up finding not one native site, but 2 native sites on this very small parcel of land. And I think for the people that were coming in to watch the dig, it was probably the most shocking thing we found, because I mean, we found some revolutionary things. That's not a huge shock for a revolutionary camp slash training field, but to say, oh, and by the way, this site goes back at least 3,000 years based on some native pottery that we found. I think that really kind of stopped people to think about this Charlestown is a very old and historic and important town, but that's on top of, you know, an 8,000 to 10,000 year-long history that was there before.
And so why do you think it's important for us to think about this type of preservation or this type of collecting and saving these, you know, our history?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I've never had to struggle with in Boston was to convince people that history mattered. And that's the best and easiest thing about my job, is that I don't ever have to stop and go, now people, this can help the city, this can tell people what's important about the city. People get it, and so that's good. The native stuff I think is a little bit less appreciated, but it's I think something that people kind of instantaneously recognize as being another part of the story. But for Boston, our history is why people come here, it's why people live here, it's why people want to stay here. It's the feeling of the depth of time that you get here that kind of makes Boston the place that people want to be. And whether you look at tourism dollars through historical tourism, or if you look at the jobs that people want to bring to the city, because we have this great economy that's based on our history and the strength of our history, you can really make an easy case for why history matters in Boston. And since we're finding new history, we're adding more to that. Like you can't come up with new historical sites unless you do archaeology, because we can bring those back out of the ground and bring those back up to the surface to say, you know, sure, this is the Freedom Trail and it's right next to the State House, but did you know that circle of brick 10 feet away is a 1630s well? Let's include that as part of what we come here to see, because Boston was founded because it needed, the colonists needed fresh water. So that well is the reason why Boston is here. And that should be on par with the State House, the old State House next door. So to me, it's all kind of bringing those stories back up and adding to the narrative that we already have, which is great because we already have a narrative to work within. So people understand the history already, and we're just kind of supporting it and adding to it, which is amazing to be able to do that.
And it's wonderful to add to it with tangible items.
Exactly,
So for example, you brought a couple of finds from, this is a Charlestown?
This came out of a construction site in Charlestown. The other artifacts are unprovened artifacts that are...
Sure, please. Can I touch them?
It
just feels like I should have gloves or something.
Yeah, these aren't museum pieces. These are all... like we treat artifacts like documents. So think of each artifact as like a page in a book. And so when you put all the artifacts together, you get the story. And so what that actually is a redware milk pan. So that would be what people would be pouring milk in to sit and cool, and that would separate the curds in the whey. And it had to be large and flat. But the reason why I brought that in was because, one, because it's not from an archaeological site, so I actually could bring it here, because otherwise I would need a state permit. But the other reason why I brought it in was that in Charlestown, this was made in the city of Charlestown in the 1700s. And in the 1700s, yeah. So it's about 250 years old.
I feel almost bad.
No, please. It was made by a potter. I'm not sure which potter because it's not decorated, and that's really how we would find out. But it was made by a potter, and the reason the reason why Charlestown was such a successful town before the Battle of Bunker Hill, where it burned to the ground, the reason why it really existed was because of these redware potters. And that's a story that's just lost to time.
Sure.
There were about 125 potters working in Charlestown up to the Battle of Bunker Hill, making pots like that, and they were it was basically the paper plates of the time. It was cheap and easy to make.
That's so interesting.
And everybody needed them, and so it was a huge industry with a lot of money being produced by these pots.
Sure.
During the battle, everyone fled out of the city, all the kilns were lost, and the potters never came back because they would have had to start from scratch and build new kilns. And so that kind of storyline vanished from the city of Charlestown, except in the archaeology, because everywhere you look in Charlestown, you find the redware that was made there, you find pieces from the kilns where they were actually producing it. And I argue that there really wouldn't have been much of a Charlestown to burn if it wasn't for the redware potters making the city a success. And so this is such a missing link to the story of Charlestown.
Wow.
And that's a piece of Charlestown pottery. And I haven't given that a good look, but if you flip it over, it's not decorated on the back. And what we're actually going to do in the upcoming year is start scanning these with 3D lasers to pull out fingerprints, because we can actually start to find the fingerprints of the potters themselves on the pots. We can go to the kiln sites where they were being made and find the fingerprints on the kiln pieces,
Oh my goodness.
and start connecting potters to pots where they were found, and basically reconstruct these makers' hands and say, this is Potter X. Maybe that's Grace Parker or John Harris or somebody from that time period. And Potter X designed this type of pot, and this is what their wares look like. And we can kind of bring back to life the potter based on their actual handprint from 250 years ago. So I mean, that's kind of the stuff that we can do with archaeology, and that's kind of where I want to take the program, because there's so much that can be done.
And tell me, I mean, how would you, so this, for example, this, I mean, how would you identify where this, or what year this would be from?
Sure. One of the basic definitions, and it's the easiest one to do, distinctions, the color. So that's white, that's red. If it's red, it's usually local, meaning made somewhere nearby. If it's white, it's almost always made in England. So that's an English ceramic called Staffordshire slipware. The decorations are pretty distinct. You can see this has kind of the combing effect to it. This is what you would see from the late 1600s to early 1700s. These were very common back then. Think bread loaf dishes, cups, bowls, most of just about anything you would need on a table could have been made out of this kind of stuff. But this is upwards of 300, 350 years old.
Wow.
So it really changes over time. The styles go from looking almost medieval to looking kind of more similar to what we would find today with the kind of white, pure white dishes. That took a while to develop that technology. So just based on the color even, we can get time information about things. And the reason why we have a lot of pottery here is that the historical archaeologists rely on the pottery because it's so well dated that if we find a piece of pottery, we can pretty quickly date the dirt that we're digging in just based on the potsherd, because the information about the pottery is so well known already that we don't have to kind of reinvent the wheel every day we go out there. We can kind of use the information we have to date the stuff that goes on.
That's great.
I have another piece of ceramic. It's a Chinese porcelain.
Oh, I can see that.
It's called the pagoda pattern, which is actually still made today.
Oh,
but
it
this
is?
is so this is 300, 400 years old, but it's the same type of pattern you would see on a dish made in a factory today, because they never really changed the style. And the last thing I have is a bottle from Germany from the 1600s. Has a little eye on it. These are called Bellarmines.
Wow, I can see that eye. Wait, can I? Let's see. Oh my goodness.
Bellarmines are Bartman jugs. Have a bottle shape with a neck. But they're renowned for having faces on them, and they almost look like Santa Claus if you go back far enough, but over time they start getting, we call it grotesque, where they start looking angrier and more stylized, where it went from looking kind of jolly and happy to like an angry, evil face. And these bottles were used as bottles just to store things in, but occasionally you'll actually find these buried under houses and filled with things like pieces of fabric with pins through them and human hair and different things like that, and they're called witch bottles, and they were actually ritually buried under houses to kind of ward off evil spirits in the 1600s, because you got to figure this was during the Salem witch trials. These can be found with all these kind of anti-witchcraft things going on, because we're talking about Boston, that kind of thing was going on. So it impacts the stuff that you can find on an archaeological site. The Salem witch trials have an impact on Boston, and you can see this stuff occurring all over the city, all over anywhere.
So there's a lot of mapping that happens.
Yeah, a lot.
Sort of almost like clues to a crime in some ways.
Yeah, and we have to look at, where do we find the concentrations of the artifacts? Where do we don't find the concentrations of the artifacts? Right. What ages are different things? Are we finding whole things versus very broken up things? That can tell us a lot about what's going on the site. So it all adds to the puzzle.
Great.
Yeah.
And so in this, what is this?
This is our trial. This is kind of the archaeologist ultimate tool.
I was going to say, it's not an
It's part of my logo.
Yeah.
No, this is the trowel. This is what we use to dig everything. It helps us get the dirt out of the way. It helps us, even so much as if we take an artifact out of the ground, we use it to point where the artifact came out of the ground so that when we come back, if we want to show somebody, we know exactly where it came from, because just the information about exactly where it was in the ground can tell us a ton of information. So it's not just the artifacts, it's where the artifacts came out of the ground that really tell the story. So the trowel is kind of, the ultimate tool for archaeology.
And do you ever think about, you're doing all this work, but do you ever thinking about what we will leave behind, like in our current day, and like what that might look like? Because the things that we have now are so different and almost biodegradable. Or
well, I've been thinking about that quite a bit lately, because it's interesting when you go to a historic site, the amount of essentially garbage on a 1600 site is pretty remarkable. There's a lot of it. And I just dug in the backyard of the Clough House in the right behind Old North Church. And it's a house built in 1711 and basically was in use for 300 years. We only dug down about 3-4 feet in the backyard in 10 holes, think of roughly the size of a small bathroom. We found 37,000 artifacts in that tiny space. And the amount of garbage that piles up in the back of these old houses is unbelievable. It's great for archaeology because that's the information that we need, but in a lot of cases, these people didn't leave behind a lot of written records. And so we have to kind of rely on the stuff to tell the story. If you think about today, we have a lot more record taking that we take of ourselves, whether it be a formal information that's collected about people today, even things like Facebook and Twitter. You can get a lot about someone's life based on the numerous posts that they've put online about themselves. So we're going to have that information that we just don't have about people in the past. So that may help future archaeologists because there'll be a lot fewer holes to fill with the information. But we also send all of our stuff away when we throw it out. It ends up in landfills or it ends up in incineraries. So we might be looking at these large piles of stuff where we can't assign them to any one person because it may be more stuff than we've ever seen before because it's all in one spot, but it's a collective whole. It's not an individual story. And so it may be almost impossible to get, archaeology the way we think of it today about us currently in the future.
Yeah, but do you think, is there a responsibility that we have in terms of what we save and what we throw away?
Everybody should keep a journal.
Yeah.
It would make my life so much easier if everybody I dug up, or not dug up, but the stuff that I dug up was accompanied by a journal, and even the mundane stuff, like tell me how many plates you own. That would be really helpful. But no, I think that people need to understand that it's actually a good thing that we don't throw out as much stuff as we do in on our properties because it keeps things cleaner. But that maybe archaeology is best served for looking at the deep past rather than the present. And perhaps, the need for archaeology may diminish, although we may always have the need to look at things in the past, but the need for archaeology about, the 2000 plus may not be there. And we'll be off in Mars doing archaeology there instead.
Maybe. Yeah. Or we'll have an archaeologist online digging
exactly,
through
that would work too.
web. That's kind of futuristic.
Yeah,
but speaking of online, and you have a really amazing Facebook page, which you're literally taking pictures on site of some of these artifacts. And just you holding it reminded me of some of the photographs where it's just your hand.
Yeah. My left hand is in every photograph on our Facebook page.
It is.
But I think that that's actually been something that's helped us greatly. I think when I first started posting on our Facebook page, it was very like studio shots of, with the white background with the clean artifact. And I think that just doesn't get across the human aspects of these artifacts. It makes them look like museum pieces, and they're not. They're not meant to be in a glass case. They're meant to tell the story of the past. And so by holding them, I think is kind of opening up archaeology to the personal side of it, like the human side of it. And so as soon as I started taking pictures like that, our Facebook really kind of started exploding. And we've gotten a lot more involvement by everybody around the world, frankly, mostly in Boston, but around the world, with the stuff that we're finding. And now we're live Facebooking and tweeting our
Wow.
digs because people want to know what's coming out of the ground right then, even if they're not actually able to go out to the site. You know, if they want to check in during their lunch break, they can see the artifact that came out of the ground 2 minutes ago, being held by the archaeologist, talking about what it is and what it tells us about the history of the site, and you can kind of participate remotely or not. You can get up and come out and see our digs because they're all open to the public too. So.
And you also have volunteers, and you're getting people involved in that way.
Right.
And so, how can people who are interested in first, seeing these artifacts,
Right.
Seeing the lab and becoming involved, how could they do that?
They can email me. My contact information is available online, boston.gov/archaeology. I take volunteers. I am the only staff of the city archaeology program, so everything else besides me is by volunteers. So I run the digs, but everyone digging is a volunteer. I run the lab, but everybody doing the lab work is a volunteer. And so I need people who are interested in history to help me out because I have 2,000 boxes of artifacts that need to be processed at the lab, so there's an unlimited amount of work. And every year we do 2 or 3 digs, and those all need to be dug by volunteers. And I have people that know what they're doing, that have done a lot of archaeology, that work with people that have never dug a planting hole, much less a test pit. And together we can figure out how to do it. It's not rocket science. It's just the carefulness is really all I need out of people, is to take their time and be careful. It's not something that you can't learn how to do on the field. In field schools, when you learn to do archaeology, you get handed a shovel and someone tells you when you're doing it wrong, but otherwise, you have to learn by doing. And so the lab volunteers help me process the collections. The field volunteers help me dig the sites. It's all real archaeology for anybody that's interested. And I can use all the help I can get. So.
And you don't need a degree to do that.
You don't need a degree. You need a degree to run the site, but you don't need a degree to help me out.
Right. So I think it's especially for people who are retired and are interested in getting involved, people who like history. I think it's a nice way to learn more about your program, and then just
Mm-hmm.
thinking in general about how we can think about preservation and increase transparency around preservation.
Exactly.
So well, thank you so much, Joseph, for being here, and best of luck with all of your work.
Thanks.
And thank you for joining us today on Seniors Count. The show is brought to you by Mayor Martin J. Walsh and our Commissioner Emily Shea. To contact us, please give us a call at 617-635-4366 and the Mayor's 24-hour hotline at 617-635-4500. You can also email us at elderly@boston.gov, and you can find us on Facebook. Have a great afternoon.
I see skies of blue and clouds of white, bright blessed days, dark sacred nights, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I think to myself,